On now to the top story of this hour. Is the British broadcasting company, better known simply as BBC, are they on the hunt to connect the Yellow Vest protest in France to the Kremlin? That's the conclusion being drawn following leaked messages sent by a BBC correspondent suggesting that their news team is in search of any possible leads connecting Moscow to the French movement. In one message, the BBC correspondent goes as far as to say that her editors are, quote, out for blood. RT correspondent Peter Oliver has the details.
Over the last 5 weeks, we've seen France engulfed by violence as people come out onto the streets to say they simply can't afford to live under French President Emmanuel Macron. Text messages between a BBC Russia journalist and another reporter apparently show who to point the finger of blame at. Not the French government, not French taxes, but the Kremlin.
Taxes?
People can't really manage to
pay everything.
Life is so expensive.
Must be the Russians behind it, right? We asked the BBC to respond to these potentially embarrassing revelations. This is what they had to say.
As the French Foreign Ministry had spoken publicly about media reports of a possible Russian influence in the protests, it was perfectly reasonable for our correspondent to raise the subject. However, in the end, her reports made no mention of a possible connection with Russia at all. We stand by our impartial, independent journalism.
I spoke to some people here on the streets of Paris and asked them if they saw the shadowy hand of the Kremlin behind these demonstrations.
Everything's possible nowadays.
You should ask Trump. No, I'm joking. It's a joke. You don't know.
No, of course they're not behind. No.
Come on, they say the Russians were behind the U.S. presidency as well, so, you know.
No, come on, no. Of course, no.
With more on this strange twist and bold move by the BBC, we'll turn now to former UK MP George Galloway. Hey there, George. So what is your take on this, the BBC's so-called journalistic angle, as they're calling it, of the Yellow Vest protest?
Well, of course, the French people wouldn't know how to rise up against unrepresentative government and wreak revenge on tyranny. They only did it more than 200 years ago and cut off the heads of their king and queen. If President Putin hadn't told them to go on the streets, they wouldn't have been able to find their way there. This level of absurdity sums up the whole Russiagate tidal wave that we've been treated to on both sides of the Atlantic for the last couple of years. The BBC is, of course, the British state mouthpiece. It is directly funded by the British government, by the British state, as well as, for the most part, through a license fee that you go to jail if you don't pay. Even Stalin never thought of that one.
Now, George, as you say, the BBC, need we remind folks, is a state-sponsored network. Yet here stateside, they have not been required to register under FARA, unlike some other people. Not sure.
Very good point.
Not sure what their status is across the pond or how that's treated. But given this information, how does this speak to the overall Russian interference narrative?
Well, I've just been writing about the fact that in Britain tonight, our old people are cold, many of our children are hungry, families are disintegrating under economic pressure, crime and violence cannot be combated due to police cuts. And what are our media doing? Our media are dining with their intelligence handlers to continually fret and obsess about Russia. It tells you everything you need to know, in fact. This Russia-phobia is really completely out of hand. The good news is more and more people know it. There's nobody in Britain blaming Putin for Britain's problems, and I don't think there is in France either.
Oh, interesting. He's not being blamed for the Brexit.
No, although they can't make up their mind. Is President Putin this Mephistophelian genius, or is he presiding over a basket case country? They can't make up their mind, but he certainly can't be both.
Now, George, do you find it hard to believe that the Yellow Vest movement, like I think many other movements happening these days, can be organic, or do all of these protests that we're seeing in sovereign countries across the world in this modern day, do they all have some sort of secretly organized funding behind them?
Yeah, maybe $4,000 worth of Facebook ads or sponsored Twitter feeds. It's simply absurd. It's deeply insulting, of course, to the people of these countries that they are somehow being directed from the Kremlin. The reality is our system is in meltdown. There's a complete collapse in the political class in Western countries. They have been discredited for almost the last 20 years in particular by their fake narratives and the failure of their policies. And the people in all countries are rising up against them. And it doesn't require RT to tell people that they should or how to do it.
Well said, and we will leave it right there. George Galloway, thank you as always.
Welcome.
Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out our channel. We hope you enjoyed the video. We have tons of content for you just like this. For more of RT America's one-of-a-kind news and analysis, be sure to subscribe and never stop questioning more.